Awesome. Well, welcome. I am Allie Levine. I'm the New England Assistant Regional Director for Alums for Campus Fairness. A quick bit of background on who we are. We are the unified alumni voice countering anti-Semitism on college campuses. And we are hosting this today in partnership with the Blue Dove Foundation. Carly is here to represent them. And we really wanted to do this so that we can make sure we're taking care of the people doing this hard work. It can take a really hard toll on your mental health, and we want to be there for you as much as we can. So a quick bit about Carly. She is the Director of Education and Programming at the Blue Dove Foundation and a licensed social worker. And the Blue Dove Foundation focuses on mental health education in the Jewish community in order to reduce stigma around mental illness and addiction. So Carly, I'll pass it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allie. And thank you for being here, those who are with us live and those who will view later. It's a real honor to get to do this with you all. And I also want to say thank you to Emily and Beth, who have facilitated the previous two sessions in this series, sort of building us up to this point. So I'm going to start with sharing my screen. And as I mentioned, we're going to start with looking at a piece of Jewish text. Can everybody see that okay?
Can I interrupt a second?
Sure.
I want to say that I practiced for 30, 40 years. This is the only thing I ever put up in my office.
This quote?
That only thing. I just wanted to throw that in.
That's pretty cool. I really love to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. So this is a pretty well-known piece of text. Perhaps it's hanging in your office. Perhaps you've seen it other places. But we're going to start with this, and I'll read it out loud. And then I'm going to give us a question to sort of think about, and I'll invite you to either unmute or type in the chat, whatever feels best for you. The piece of text, it's from Hillel. It says, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am not for others, what am I? And if not now, when?" So we can think of this in relation to many, many things. And we use this quote, we see it in many places because it has got a lot of great context. But specifically when we're thinking about mental health and caring for ourselves in relation to anti-Semitism, how does this text relate to caring for ourselves? What does it make you think of? I'll give you a minute to sort of think that over. How does this relate to caring for ourselves in relation to anti-Semitism or in general?
For me, I always think about the idea that if my cup is empty, how can I fill someone else's? And especially in like regards to anti-Semitism, like how can I continue to do this work if I'm not taking care of myself? So that's if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Really making sure that it's, not selfish to take care of myself. It's important, and it helps me continue to do work that I want to be doing and that needs to be done.
Love that. Thank you, Allie.
It strikes me very, very poignantly because it really captures if I'm not for myself, well, in terms of anti-Semitism, I am concerned. I'm an old man, and I'm basically concerned about others. But I am also concerned about myself, the way I see America, the way I see the world. So the issue of anti-Semitism directly makes me feel that I have to be for myself. But more importantly, of course, I'm much more concerned about the long-term effects of what we're seeing basically on the left, but also on the right, about anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, I lost so much confidence in myself that I don't feel terribly active in being able to do something. And of course, if not now, when? Now is the time. It's never too soon, and it's sometimes too late.
Absolutely. I think both what Marty said and Ali said are so on point for what we're seeing and experiencing right now. And, you know, we often are so good about caring for other people, right? And, you know, when we're caring for other people, we can't forget to also care for ourselves, right? When we're caring for ourselves, we're still caring for other people. And that balance, right? That's that tension that sometimes we feel where we think we have to prioritize one or the other, but the reality is that we need to be doing both of those things, and we need to be doing them now. In the same way that we would show up for someone in our life who needed our support now, we wouldn't put it off, you know, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days. We have to do the same for ourselves and take care of ourselves in the moments when we need it. And it's not selfish to do that, right? And we'll come back to that cup analogy, Ali, because I think it's so helpful for me to visualize it. So we'll come back to that. So we'll sort of use this as sort of our grounding moving forward, that even in our Jewish text, we are seeing this importance of caring for ourselves and for other people, and to do that in a timely fashion. This is woven into so many different texts in Judaism, and this is just one of many that we might see. So thinking about self-care then, it's a term we hear a lot. It's a buzzword. It sort of has lost its meaning because we use it so frequently in so many different ways. And this is a definition that I really like from the National Institute of Mental Health. And this reads that self-care is taking time to do things that help you live well and improve both your physical and mental health. One, it's a great reminder that our mental and physical bodies are so intertwined, right? We live within one body. We don't have a mental body and a physical body. We have one body that houses all of these different dimensions of ourselves. And the other piece that I really like about this is it's the intention of taking the time to do something, right? There are lots of things we do on a daily basis that meet our basic needs, right? We drink water, we eat food, we sleep, we move our body to, you know, take care of ourselves. Those are all of our basic needs that we need to just survive. And the self-care is really that piece, is what's helping us thrive, what's helping make sure that our physical needs are really taken care of, that our mental health needs are really taken care of. It's sort of that next step. And it's prioritizing that as well. Any questions about this definition of self-care? Right. Again, I invite you just to interrupt when you have a question. It's not interrupting, it's just engaging. So we often hear these terms reactive and proactive in lots of spaces. Perhaps you've heard it in relation to physical health care. Perhaps you've heard it in relation to the way that you engage in conversation with people. We're going to think about it for a moment in relation to self-care. And I'll invite you to sort of wipe away any positive or negative connotations and just think of these with a clear mind, right? And I want to think about what is reactive self-care and what is proactive self-care. Does anyone have any guesses for what these could mean? I'll give a little hint. So reactive self-care, that's what we're doing.
I find it's not that I don't have a reaction. I find it too basic to comment on. I mean, obviously reactive. If I get a pain in my back, I might put some cream on it or go make an appointment with a doctor, which is reactive self-care. And of course, I finally went out and got myself a walker so I could get more exercise. And that would be proactive self-care. But it just seemed too simple to comment on.
Sure, yeah. And I think for some people, that distinction is so clear. And for some of us, maybe we haven't had the chance to think of it in that way before. So I really love the analogy, right, that you used, right? The reactive is what we do in an instance to react to what is happening right in front of us. So whether that is a pain in your back or reading about an act of anti-Semitism or experiencing that act of anti-Semitism yourself. And proactive are one of the things we're doing in the long term that are promoting our self-care and we're building those habits. Both of them serve a really important purpose, and we need both of them really to be thriving and taking care of ourselves. And when we're also thinking about it, right, not only do we have the different ways we're reacting, but we have different dimensions of ourselves. We're not one single being. There's not one way to practice our self-care. There's lots of different pieces of ourselves that need the support. Oftentimes these are referred to as our wellness dimensions. This is something that perhaps you've seen in many different iterations. There's lots of different versions of it out there. But what this does is breaks down our individual selves into 8 different dimensions, 8 pieces of ourselves that support our overall wellness. And when we're thinking of this in relation to self-care, it can be helpful to think about what is the part of ourselves that needs self-care after we've experienced something challenging, or is the part of ourselves that needs the ongoing support when we're thinking of more of that proactive self-care. So if we are struggling with our physical self, going for a run, doing something active, doing some sort of workout, something like that might be a really great way. But if we're struggling, we're feeling isolated and we're struggling to feel connected, social self-care might be what we're needing. Connecting with other people, whether virtually or in person, based on what your abilities are, what your needs are. So this is really just to say self-care is more than just the one dimension that I think we talk about it in the media, right? It's more than just a bubble bath or a run, right? It can be so many different pieces. And then when we look at anti-Semitism and the way that that's impacting us, I think we can even dig deeper into these different places. When we're experiencing anti-Semitism in different spaces in our life, if we're seeing it in our work environment, we might need to focus on occupational self-care to address that, make sure that those around us know that we're struggling, and come up with some tactics to create a more inclusive work environment. And you can apply that into a lot of different spaces. So as we're thinking about sort of this cup analogy, right? If everybody around you is thirsty and you needed to help them get water and you had a cup full of water or a pitcher full of water, you can pour some out. But as soon as you're empty, if people around you are thirsty, you have nothing left in your pitcher to pour from. And so self-care is thinking of the ways that we can fill up the pitcher. And when I'm thinking about these 8 dimensions, these 8 wellness dimensions, you probably wouldn't mix liquids in this pitcher you're pouring from, but there are lots of liquids you might fill that pitcher with. You might fill it with still water, with sparkling water, with tea, with coffee, right? There's lots of different things that might give you the energy so that you can go support other people. It's not a perfect analogy, but I think it is really helpful as we're thinking about the fact that it is important for us to know what type of self-care we need and how we can reach that. So when we're thinking about self-care, then I want to just acknowledge there are lots of barriers for us to practice self-care. We might not have the time. We might not have the resources we may need. We might not know what we need. We might think that we've got it. We've been doing things, but it's not helping. It could be hard to adjust. So I want to just give a moment and ask, what is challenging? What are some of the barriers to practicing self-care?
Well, for me, it's laziness, basically, sloth, just letting things go. And not starting an initiative.
Mm-hmm.
COVID was an enormous barrier because it so severely limited my contact with other people. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt that's so important to your self-care. I'm starting to resume them finally.
Yeah, I think, Marty, you said something that was really helpful. Some of those things you shared were internal things right, your own motivation, your own ability to set the time to do it. And some of those things are external, right? And really are not within our control. For instance, the pandemic, which totally limited our ability to do things in the way that we were used to. And the priority was keeping ourselves safe. And so that limited our ability to practice self-care, because we could only focus on one of those 8 dimensions, which was our physical health. That was the top priority at that moment. So I think
Exactly.
Sometimes there are internal things that are preventing us from being able to engage, and sometimes there are external things, and sometimes the priorities are being set for us, and we have to just keep moving forward. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
Anyone
welcome.
else?
I'm thinking specifically about anti-Semitism and self-care. An issue that I find myself facing with it is sometimes it feels like a never-ending battle. So when do I choose to take a step back and like take care of myself? And like, if it's what I'm dealing with every day and what I think about every day, like it feels hard to then at every step of the way do self-care. But I know it can be smaller steps and it doesn't have to be the big thing, but definitely that's the barrier, I would say, for me.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of something that Emily had talked about in the first session, right? Is when we experience something that is really challenging, and then we experience another thing and another thing, it sort of builds up. And then it's really hard to even take the smallest step forward for caring for ourselves, because those things compound against each other. So if we experience, something having to do with anti-Semitism, and then we read about something in the paper having to do with it, and then we have a friend share with us, those things compound against one another. And something really important when we're thinking about that definition of self-care is that even a small act is, even taking a small amount of time can make a pretty sizable difference. We don't have to be doing grand gestures. We can be doing small things. But that can be really challenging in the moment to build out the time for. And that's sort of what self-care comes down to, is that when we're thinking about how do we engage in self-care, it's setting the intention to do it, creating the space to engage in self-care, and then creating the time for it. So maybe we are doing self-care every day, but if we're not framing it as self-care, it's probably a little bit less effective. But if when we go on our 10-minute walk and we frame it as, this is the way I'm caring for myself today, and I've set aside the 10 minutes to do this walk today, that makes a huge difference. That can take something that we may have not thought about, and it gives it a lot more power. We kind of flip it on its head and say, this is my self-care. I didn't have to do this walk today, but I prioritized myself. And so I think, and this particular slide was created for us by a college student who is working with us to create a mental health college toolkit, which is a really beautiful thing she has created with a workshop that goes along with it. And so I think in particular, it's pretty special to learn this from a college student who is living that life right now, who is seeing and experiencing that anti-Semitism on college campuses and the normal trials and tribulations of, a late teen, early 20-year-olds on campus. And this is something that she is able to say, if we can do these two things, this is what really makes a difference. This is what my research has found. So I think something that's pretty special is when we take some time to think about what are the things we're doing, we can reframe some of our daily activities and give it that power of caring for ourselves. And we can start to see the ways we're already building in that self-care, and then the opportunities that we might have available for creating more self-care. And so what I'll invite you to do on your own time, or at a time when you're feeling so inspired, is to think back to these 8 dimensions and think about, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, what are the self-care things you are already doing in these areas? What are the things that are really easy for you to do and that you can keep doing? And what are the areas you might want to focus a little bit more on? What would help you feel more fulfilled? What would help you feel more cared for? And when we say self-care, sometimes we think we have to do it all on our own. But the reality is, for a lot of these, we can connect with other people, and sometimes we have to connect with other people. So when we're thinking of emotional health, emotional self-help might look like engaging with a mental health professional, somebody who can guide you through those conversations. Financial self-help might be connecting with somebody who has more financial expertise than you do to make sure you feel safe and sound and secure. And so again, as our world is changing and opening back up in ways that maybe it hasn't been during the pandemic, it gives some more opportunities to think about how could you connect with other people to care for yourself. It doesn't have to be done alone. It could be done in community. And the other beautiful thing is when we are taking time and prioritizing caring for ourselves, we are helping our community in a couple of different ways. The first way being that we are role modeling for other people that this is important behavior to set aside time to care for ourselves. It also helps us so that when we show up to the next thing where we have to be the carer, right? Where we are engaging with ACF around anti-Semitism, that we can bring our full selves, the best version of ourselves that day. And then that provides care to our community. So it's sort of, not only does it help ourselves, but it helps our greater community. So as we're kind of coming, towards the end of our session where we're thinking about these things, I'll give everyone a moment just to think, and if anyone feels comfortable sharing, I want to just ask a few questions. What type of self-care has worked well for you in the past or is working well for you right now? It could be in relation to these 8 dimensions or just sort of more general, but what sort of self-care has worked well for you?
For me personally, if I get anxious, I'll just go down to the gym for like 20 minutes and work off the nervous energy. That tends to help me a lot. Or if I'm upset about something, that also helps.
Yeah, our physical and mental bodies are so connected. So that physical activity does really calm our nervous system, does help calm our mind. So that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. I think something that has really helped me or has worked for me in this last year, especially in relation to anti-Semitism, is taking a moment when I'm feeling overwhelmed to identify what it is that might actually make me feel better. I used to just jump into one self-care tactic, and if that didn't work, then I was like, it's over, it's not working, I'm not strong enough, I'm not good enough, and I would kind of find myself in a spiral. But I think for me now, it's sort of identifying, taking the time to figure out what it is that made me feel upset or feel overwhelmed, and what is something that would help that. So whether that's calling a friend to say, I just feel really upset by this article I read, or going on a walk to help sort of re-regulate my body, or finding some sort of way I can actively engage in a cause that is supporting work against anti-Semitism, right? There are lots of different avenues. And I'm also trying to create some grace and space for myself when I try something and it doesn't really fill my self-care need for that day, to say, okay, try something else, or we'll try it again tomorrow. Because, we have lots of days ahead of us. And some days we will end feeling like, wow, we really did a great job caring for ourselves. And other days we'll say, well, we did the best we could today. We're going to try again tomorrow. And just sort of taking this like all or nothing experience out of it to say it's okay to try again has been really helpful. And I know that as I've talked with colleagues in the field, that's something they've shared that they've seen both with people they work with, but also for themselves as well.
Something super niche, but has like definitely worked for me. This is obviously my job. I think about it all day, every day. It's also something I'm very passionate about. So having very clear-cut boundaries with myself, like I have 2 separate Instagram accounts, and I have one that I follow all of the accounts that are like the ADL and Jewish on campus and reporting all of the different acts of anti-Semitism and what's going on. And then I have one that's purely like my personal account. So when I want to disconnect and doom scroll, like I don't have to be seeing that in it. I can kind of separate it and have that space for me to, you know, wind down and get out of my own mind, and not see that alongside all of my friends and that type of thing.
I love that. And I think, especially as we're thinking about the wellness dimensions, right? That hits so many. That's intellectual, emotional, social. And I think it's a great sort of representation how sometimes when we practice self-care, it hits a lot of our dimensions with or without us knowing that. And naming that is also just really helpful because it also helps you recognize that in this one seemingly small act of creating 2 types of engagement on social media, you're caring for yourself in a lot of ways. So I really love that. And I actually might take note of that for myself. Anything else? Any last comments on what sort of self-care has worked for you? Wonderful. Well, as we're starting to wrap up, what I want to invite you to do is think about in the coming weeks, what's a goal that you could set for yourself in regards to self-care? There's lots of things you could do. You could start by spending a little time thinking about what are the things you're already doing. You can think about a plan of action when you are feeling like you're in need of some type of care. How could you think about what are the different things you could try? When you try something and it doesn't work, your goal could be to try something different, which sounds seemingly small, but in reality is very challenging to do when we're desperately in need of that self-care. Can also be identifying people who can help you with your self-care, people you can plug in with, connect to when you're in need of something, whether it is emotional, social, intellectual, physical, anything on this wellness wheel. As we're wrapping up, I want to read a prayer. One of the things that we do, one of our workshops at the Blue Dove Foundation, is we write Misha Berach prayers for healing for different topics. So this was written by a group of individuals during one of our workshops, and it's a Misha Berach for celebrated connection, which I thought was particularly appropriate for this group, this organization that is working on connecting people to fight against anti-Semitism. So the Misha Berach for celebrated connection. May we all celebrate our connection through Judaism and treat each other as family. Let us love and support each other in all of life's experiences, good and bad. May we all focus on healing the world through loving kindness and each other. May we be patient with others and ourselves and focus on being the best version of ourselves. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you so much for joining and for viewing at a later date when you're able to view. We really appreciate your time. On behalf of the Blue Dove Foundation and Be Well of JFNA and Bamidbar, it's been such an honor doing this series with you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carly, for being here tonight. This was absolutely wonderful. And like you said, a big thanks to both, Be Well and Bamidbar as well. It's been a really, really wonderful series. And I think that everyone has gained a lot of helpful skills from it. So thank you for being here.